Hello, welcome back to Demented Squirrel Crafts. Today we are celebrating the International Day of the Mushroom, which is 15th of October, and I will be doing two little creatures, one based on the fly Agaric and one based on Inky Deathcap mushrooms. So the first thing to do is base both bodies. So the first one is a 90mm egg and the second one is a 70mm egg. So the basing is done our standard way. I'll leave a link in the description. You let that dry before we start the next bit. So the stem, which is the lower part, the stalk of the mushroom, I'm just putting a couple of millimeters of foam on and then using like a pokey stick, or you can use a ruler, or you can use, any sort of tool to make a bunch of indents and lines in it to give it some texture rather than just have it completely plain. And you leave that to dry for a little bit before we go on to the next step. So the next step is the ring or the body frill, the bit that goes along to make it look fluffy. So I rolled out a sausage of white, rolled it with my plastic roller using some cornstarch to keep it from sticking, and then using my texture tool, which is just a piece of pet brush, to make the textures, make it look frilly. You could also use a pokey stick, you could also use an icing tool for making frills and stuff like that. A lot depends on what you're comfortable with and what sort of actual end result you want to get for it. But you just put it on. I put little gathers in it so it sticks up a little bit to give that floof effect on it, so that it looks, a bit more movement and a bit more organic. And then I just textured the top and then made sure it was all curling nicely, filled in any gaps, and then left it to dry. Like you can see the texture there. I decided to have two mushrooms in this one. So the second mushroom is going to be a Shaggy Mane Inky Cap mushroom. Again, poisonous mushroom. And it is a white cone-shaped mushroom that has black underneath rather than white, and then white on top. And there's a variety of different ones. Some of them are more ball-shaped and some of them are more cone-shaped. But they are like the perfect fantasy mushroom, super fantastic. They're officially called coprinus comatus, which, if it doesn't tell you it's poisonous, it's like it's got coma in the middle of it in its name. It's one of my favorite mushrooms. It's super cool. There's loads of lore related to it, that sort of thing. So what I decided to do was make an egg shape and then layer up all of the frills, because in the actual mushroom it's not regular frills, they're literally, it's shaggy mane. It's exactly like, the shape of it's like cousin It from Addams Family. And so it's just layered and it's messy and it's hairy. It's a bit like if you had like what is that, the shaggy dog, like one of those big fluffy dogs. It's just that sort of a texture to it. It's fantastic. So I made it by using my texture tool with the cap brush, because I like how organic it looks, I like how messy it looks, I like how that it's, none of the lines are dead straight and that sort of thing. So it gives far more fluidness, far more organicness to it. You can, other people use pointy sticks and cocktail sticks, or they make a rolling pin with lines on it, or they use, icing things. But I found those too regular for something this organic. So I just made loads and loads and loads of little strips and then cut them up, and then, we're going to layer them onto the egg so it has its texture. And this just takes quite a bit of time and quite a lot of little pieces in order to cover the whole one, because you start at black and then you go up and it gets whiter and whiter at the top. It gets more and more little pieces. So then we're going to put a face on. I decided a a little black face on this with green eyes to denote its poison, because green has always been the colour of poison since way before Disney time. So the usual, a little oval of clay, you put it on. I will figure out how to make focus on my camera, and then you just add in, you know, the crystal eyes. I just have these two just to donate, you know, the eyes on it. And then I'm going to leave it to dry completely, and then I'm going to put the last little bits on top that would cover over a bit of the face and stuff, so it's more shaggy mane and not so clean. As I drop, I couldn't find my chopstick, which is how this worked, because normally I put my eyes in with the end of the chopstick, but I used this tool, and it was definitely a case of not the right tool for the job. But yeah, that's how it goes sometimes. So yeah, you leave it to dry, and then it's, you know, it looks like that. And then these are the final bits of just adding in little bits to cover up, make a fringe, make the top look a bit more shaggy. Just a lot of texture, a lot of like trying to make it look like the mushroom. So we're going to leave that to dry and go back and focus on the bigger mushroom. So the bigger mushroom I'm going to do is a fly Agaric, which is, you know, the one that everybody uses when they go poisonous mushrooms, the one with the white cap and the red cap. The red cap and all the white spots and stuff like that. So what I do is I make the cap, the outside cap, separately, and I let it dry with a form, so it's easier to manipulate and it's easier to work with. So cut a circle out, and then I form it over a large ball and let it dry on the large ball so that it's in a shape before you add the gills and before you put it on your final mushroom. Here I'm just checking that the size and the shape look okay. So yeah, you just put it on here and then you let it dry for a little while until it's hard, not necessarily hard to touch, but that if you put your finger in it, it's not going to leave an indent in it. So now I'm going to put the face on. So again, it's just going to be a white face because this mushroom is so obviously red and white. But I'm doing green eyes again to denote that it's poisonous. Yay! And I found my chopstick. I had been drying twirly, swirly bits on it, so it's much easier with the chopstick. You make the hole, you put the eye in, use the end of the chopstick to push it in. It's just a much easier system, and I need to make sure I have more metal chopsticks. And so for the face on this one, I decided to add a little texture using a vegetable sponge. So it's the sponge you get for putting in the bottom of the fridge so that your vegetables and fruit have somewhere to sit that's soft but still has a lot of air. So I use that for making some texture on the face. And I'm just cleaning up little bits that came over and just making sure that everything looks okay. A lot of this is applying texture and then reapplying texture, as you can see there. It's just a little bit of texture, so it's not super flat and plain. And then we leave that to dry because we want the body to be completely dry before we try and attach the cap on, so that we don't squash anything. So the cap needs gills, which is, you know, where it gets its oxygen and stuff, the same as a fish. So I make a circle in a couple of millimeters, put it on the inside, and then make sure it all fits and looks smooth and is all like about right. And then I use a flat tweezers to make the gills. This is the easiest way I found for me because it gives the gills an upright edge to it that's flat, not roundy, because if you use like a pointy stick or a chopstick or something like that, it's skewer, it will give it a much roundier shape. So you start on the corners and you work your way around centrically so that all of the gills are coming out from the center. I touch up the edges with a little, you know, with my pokey stick, and then make sure that it's all nice and it's what I want for the shape, because you don't want it out of shape too much. You want it to look round, and you want it to look like your proverbial mushroom. This can be a lot of fiddling about, like a lot of when you make creatures is about fiddling about with the last sort of shapes and making them the way that you want. So you leave that to dry, basically. So when you put it together, you put a little bit of foam on the top. Now I much prefer to put the cap on first and then add all the white little scale spots. So you put it on, make sure that it's sitting where you want, you know, lift up the edges, make it all cohesive so you can see the face and that it's got like the nice shape that you would want for it, as opposed to, you know, a very round mushroom that would hide the face. So you just go around and, you know, as I've said before, a lot of making these figures is just fiddling a little bit with the different shapes and the different textures and making them blend. So you leave that to dry, and then you come back to make the spots, the scales they're called. So if you saw the last video, you saw that I had used a sculptey tool to make little half dome circles, and for me they just take too much time, so I just make them with my hands, a little round ball. I'm going to use the same texture sponge to give them a little bit of texture, and then I'm just going to do an awful lot of little spots. So I try and do them in groups of like 3 or 5 or 7, you know, the usual do your groups in odd numbers kind of thing, and then just texture them as I go and just put lots of little spots on. Obviously it's a delicate balance between having too many spots and too little spots, and what size of spots and how many put on, and how close to Disney-fied do you want it to get, how realistic do you want it to get as far as realistic goes. But these are kind of my favorite mushrooms to make, because you can make the cap in any color, white with pink or pastels or neons or anything like that. It's always, you know, a fun way to go. And then you leave that to dry for a little bit, and while it's drying, what we're going to do is we're going to add more mushrooms. So this is the part of adding my favorite mushrooms, which are autumn skullcaps, false parasols, deathcaps, you know, more poisonous mushrooms. So little bits of wire, color them with a black permanent marker, cut more wire than you need, and then let them dry. So I want to make them like a luminous color, like a bioluminescent color, glow in the dark color. So I have some neon green and some white, and you mix it up to make a super pale greeny color, because neon has some blue in it, so it's not like a straight green color. It's I know it's a weird color. When it mixes, it makes a really nice luminous green color. So you put the wire all the way into the foam. You make a tiny little ball of clay. You turn it into a cone, press the end of it so it looks like a Hershey's Kiss, and then put that on top of your wire. And that's literally all there is to the tiny mushrooms. You just, you know, plonk it in there, make sure it all stays there like that, and then you do the rest of them. Again, follow along with the uneven numbers of, you know, attachments. So I did 3 on one side and 2 on the other, and you can play around with them as many as you want. I also made a little tail on the back of it, depending on, you know, as if it was a tail, and then the other mushrooms were horns and that sort of thing, as you can see. And then I did exactly the same on the larger mushroom, because I thought, well, the way to blend the two together, make them match, was they both have tiny little poisonous mushrooms coming out of them. And then you just play with them as you need. You can always fill in any gaps, any little holes you make with a little bit of white clay, so nobody sees the holes, if that's what you want to do. If you want them to be more structurally safe, you can add a little bit of super glue once all the clay is perfectly dry and stuff. and that's it. And then you just brush off any cornstarch that's left over, because it just is a powder, and that's it. It's all done. So I'm pretty happy with what I did with these creatures. They're pretty close to what I had envisioned with my sketches. So here's some pretty pictures. Thanks to everybody for the support, and if you wish to support me, I do have a Patreon or a Ko-fi. Thank you to everybody. Thanks for watching. So this month's lesson to be learnt is only get official SD cards, because otherwise you lose a week's worth of footage and drive yourself insane. So thank you to everybody. I hope everybody has a wonderful week, and see you soon. Bye.